We are joined by Jon Lieber. He's the head of research and managing director for the United States at Eurasia Group. Jon, thank you very much for joining us. We just heard there from our correspondent Benji how Trump is moving full steam ahead with his immigration policies. Just how feasible and how quickly do you think he'll be able to carry out his mass deportation plan, given the legal and logistical challenges?
I think the big challenges here are all on the logistical side. It's not easy to round up a large group of people living in the U.S. interior. Previous presidents have tried it to varying degrees of success. President Obama probably had the most success. In 2013, he deported about 460,000 unauthorized migrants living in the U.S. And I think that's probably a floor for what Trump could conceivably achieve, at least in 2025. Over time, what you're going to see is additional federal resources going to this task. You're going to see cooperation from some state and local authorities, particularly in red states. And that's ultimately going to be effective at giving the federal government more resources to identify and then deport people living in the U.S. without authorization. I think this is a major campaign goal for President Trump. It's really central to his political identity. They're already putting some resources towards this with the announcement of Tom Homan as his border czar, who's clearly been in touch with the local law enforcement and is ready to go on day one. And I think it's only a matter of probably days or weeks before we start seeing the first types of large-scale and dramatic raids that will round up some of these illegal migrants.
Right, Jon, so even if his immigration policies face hurdles in terms of the logistics of carrying it out, is there more to this than just rhetoric? I mean, that he's trying to also do what he promised during the campaign trail and hope that it would also send a message to actually deter people from entering the U.S. And also there's this whole PR front about it that he is doing something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the message to migrants who would otherwise be coming to the U.S. is loud and clear, that the border is now closed, that if you come here, the government will find you. And it's going to be a lot harder to, say, for example, apply for asylum status in the U.S., which is one of the many ways that migrants coming from Central and South America end up getting legal authorization to stay in the U.S. for a long time before they're hearing before a judge. So now Trump is saying, if you want to apply for asylum, you do that from outside the United States. And that alone is going to dramatically reduce the numbers of flows coming into the U.S. And of course, all of this ends up having a potentially dramatic effect on the workforce in the United States, because if you look at where labor force growth has been coming from over the last several years, millions of new migrants coming in, and that's been one of the things that's helped combat against wage inflation over the end of the Biden administration. So we would expect that to start to reverse in the coming months, and that could lead to some inflationary pressures in the U.S., which of course will be another political challenge for President Trump.
And Jon, Trump's slew of executive orders are raising questions about the scope of presidential power. I mean, it certainly seems like a convenient way for presidents to, bypass congressional approval. But just how sustainable do you think this sort of reliance on executive orders will be moving forward?
The government in the United States has gotten less and less functional over the last several decades. And it's harder and harder to do things through legislation. And as a result, the president, executive branch, under both parties has been trying to increase their power. What I think is notable is the degree to which the Trump administration is hitting the ground running here. So yes, some of these are aggressive expansions and attempts to grab more power for the executive branch. And they will be challenged in court. And earlier, the reporter who was on before was talking about birthright citizenship. That could be overturned by the courts. We don't really know. It's never been tested by the Supreme Court. But a lot of these other issues are well within the executive's power. And, Trump exercising that power to make sure that the executive branch is loyal to him, is implementing the orders that he wants to see happening, and his ability to, for example, lay off federal workers who are too involved in diversity and inclusion efforts, I think is an exercise of his power that will be durable. So a lot of what they're doing here is going to be found constitutional and will be a big part of President Trump's legacy because legislating is so hard.
Let's talk about the tariffs that Trump has continued to, of course, reveal more about 10% on China, 25% Canada, Mexico, India, the EU emerging as possible early targets as well. First of all, is he likely to follow through with them, and the kind of retaliatory action we could see from these countries? And also with regards to Europe, how could Trump's relationship with Europe be different this time around, especially as Europe is struggling with its own problems?
So the answer is yes, Trump is going to implement some of these tariffs. We don't know when, we don't know how high, and we don't know against who. There's two key dates coming up to watch. The first is February 1st. That's the date that President Trump has said he will put tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China for a variety of reasons. The most recent that he cited was fentanyl imports into the United States. I'm not so sure that those tariffs come into place February 1, but the next key date is April 1. And that was the date in the Trump trade executive order where he's instructed basically every agency in the federal government that has anything to do with trade or international policy to report back unfair trade practices of U.S. trading partners. You mentioned Europe as a key trading partner, and the situation in Europe is very interesting. On the one hand, the Europeans have arguably been discriminating against American companies with their antitrust suits against Apple, with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, with digital services taxes and some extraterritorial taxes they've been passing. On the other hand, Europe is acutely aware of their need for the United States when it comes to the security guarantees that are going to help end the war in Russia and keep them all safe. So the Europeans are now starting to look at ways they can curry favor with Trump. And I think a lot of those end up being effective. And even if they they do end up having some of these tariffs implemented, because that's going to be the policy that Trump leads with. I think the relationship with Europe could actually improve slightly, at least relative to expectations, because of the fact that they're looking for cooperation on ending the war in Ukraine, and that is, one of Trump's biggest interests in the coming months.
Okay, Jon, thank you very much for your time and your insight this morning. Jon Lieber, Head of Research and Managing Director for United States at Eurasia Group.